Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Mr. 10%, the big guy, President Biden, waded into a response on the classified doc flap. Another response.
He was so annoyed by the question, too. He's like, why aren't you asking me about the flooding in California?
Right. He's always much more concerned about the American people than he is himself and his business operation, Biden Inc., of course. Here's what he had to say about these classified documents that were inadvertently placed at his home and his phone, the office of his phony think tank, by someone he doesn't know anything about.
We found a handful of documents were filed in the wrong place. We immediately turned them over to the archives of the Justice Department. We're fully cooperating, looking forward to getting this resolved quickly. I think you're going to find there's nothing there. I have no regrets. I'm following what the lawyers have told me they want me to do. It's exactly what we're doing. There's no there. Thank you.
No regrets, and there's no there. Well, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, so we're done with this, and I'm going to go now.
George Parry is a former federal and state prosecutor. He's a regular contributor to the American Spectator, and he blogs at knowledgeisgood.net. George, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
It's great that Biden's conscience is clear. As I said, that's good enough for me. And there's no there. From a legal perspective, would you concur with the president?
Well, from a practical perspective, since Biden controls the Justice Department and the FBI, I think he's going to be perfectly safe in this process. But from an objective legal standard, no. He is responsible for maintaining these classified documents in a safe manner, in a secure manner. And look, everybody's jumping up and down on Donald Trump's head because in the course of extended dealings with the Justice Department in the government, there were documents at Mar-a-Lago which were being maintained in a safe and under secure conditions. Biden's documents were in his garage next to his prized Corvette, a garage that his less than reputable son, who has all these fishy-looking connections with the Chinese Communist Party and the Ukraine, he had access to that garage and was going in and out of it. I mean, it's interesting to note, by the way, that although the Biden regime has denied that there were logs kept at his home as to who the visitors were coming and going, it now turns out that that's not true. There are logs, and I anticipate that Jim Jordan and the other people in the House Republican majority are going to seek access to those records as they investigate this matter.
Those logs were misfiled and inadvertently kept by someone, but they'll be turned over to the archive, so everything will be fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're so concerned about here, but
right,
as they used to say, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If what Trump did was supposedly a crime against humanity, that seems to pale in comparison compared to what's going on with Biden.
Well, it's just so curious, too. I mean, that they're in different locations. Why do you think that is? Because he blames that it's the sloppiness of his aides who packed the forms years ago.
They were misfiled
6 years ago.
You just
why
misfiled.
Some over here, some over there?
Filing error.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you want real guidance on this, you need only turn to Joy Behar, on
yes.
Whatever that show is. where
Noted
he
constitutional
culminates.
scholar.
Yeah, The View.
Exactly. And her take is, look, we know Trump is a liar
Yep.
and no good. Therefore, his alleged mishandling of classified documents, that's bad. But Biden's not a liar. Biden's a wonderful guy. Therefore, whatever he did with these documents, that doesn't count.
That's why
And
he's
that
being treated
basically
differently
is-
by the FBI. I mean, the FBI, they're letting his attorneys who have no security clearance at all keep searching the house. And when are they going to be done with this search? And why wouldn't the FBI at least stand outside the door?
Yeah, well, the FBI's got really nothing to look at here because I'm sure Biden's attorneys did their job and sanitized the results of their search. The fact that they are standing aside and letting Biden's personal attorneys do the search tells you everything you need to know about the FBI. I mean, they did a SWAT raid of Mar-a-Lago. And with Biden, they're just standing there with their thumbs in their ears and watching Biden's lawyers go in and clean things up.
They watch Biden's lawyers. They're not even watching, sort of intermittently milling about. And they wouldn't allow Trump's lawyers to watch them. I mean, they couldn't be 180. I mean, couldn't be more clearly 180 degrees apart in terms of the approach that justice is taking. And, as a former federal prosecutor, where I assume maybe at some point in time you had respect, if not reverence, for the Department of Justice and all the good prosecutors that are part of that organization, law enforcement organization, I would think that this would distress you.
Dan, given what the Department of Justice and the FBI have turned into, I don't like admitting in public that I ever worked for that outfit. Mm-hmm. It's an embarrassment. And I'll tell you this: I have plenty of former prosecutor and FBI agent friends who are absolutely appalled at what those organizations have turned into. They don't recognize them, and I don't recognize them. As for the move where they wouldn't let Trump's lawyers be present when the search was conducted. Back in my day, we didn't care if defense counsel wanted to be present. We didn't care if the defendant wanted to be present while we searched. We were going to find what we were going to find. And one of the good things about allowing the other side to be present when you're doing your search is at least they cannot legitimately claim that you planted any evidence because they were there while you were doing your search.
That's true too.
But apparently having Trump's lawyers be present while the FBI did their SWAT raid, that's unacceptable practice now. Of course, we never did SWAT raids in this kind of situation anyhow. So.
Another investigation that is a bit curious in its handling is the investigation into determining who leaked the Dobbs decision. Judge John Roberts said, well, we'll handle this in-house. He tapped Michael Chertoff, a former Secretary of Homeland Security. It's a to right point. It's a closed universe of clerks and folks that are in that orbit. They interviewed 100 people. Everybody denied it, and so that's it. We're never going to know.
Well, it's gone on long enough, and the list of suspects can't be that long. And I'm beginning to wonder if in regard to who might have leaked the opinion, was it one of the justices?
That's what. Yeah.
I mean, everybody's saying it's got to be a law clerk. It's somebody disaffected. Well, okay. Presumably they have the means of getting to the bottom of it. But now that all of this time has gone on and they still haven't come up with an answer, I'm beginning to wonder if quite possibly one of the justices might have leaked.
Well, and the reporter and the publisher and the editors of Politico are not going to reveal their source, and they know. And former President Trump, wanted them arrested. What do you think of that idea?
I'm sorry.
They wanted.
I have to. have to confess ignorance on that point.
Yeah, Trump suggested.
The source.
Trump suggested that the Politico reporters and the publisher Politico, they should be hauled away, and they'll reveal their source quickly enough. Now, there is no federal shield law, as you know, but that would be a bad look. And the larger point is right. So the political reporters who reported the story, the publisher. I wonder what kind of effort there was made to triangulate those individuals to figure out who has relationships with them that could have had access to the Dobbs issues. I just wonder how thorough this investigation was. I wonder if John Roberts really wants to identify the leaker, whether the possibility that it's a sitting justice or the possibility that it's a clerk of a sitting justice and he doesn't want to make that sitting justice uncomfortable. I just wonder how diligent this investigation was beyond going through the pro forma interviews of all of the clerks and aides and so forth.
Well, it's hard to know, but keep this in mind. Appellate lawyers, which is basically what these Supreme Court justices are. Appellate lawyers may be brilliant when it comes to analyzing the law, but I can tell you from experience, they know virtually nothing about how to run an investigation. And if they're in control of what happens,
right?
I would be surprised that if they were really doing a competent job. If they've brought in people who know how to do an investigation and they've turned them loose, which I doubt they have, but if they did that, then I would expect that we would have an answer by now.
Well, they claim they interviewed all the law clerks and all the employees. They found nothing. They said they also checked the phones for text messages. Everyone, handed in their phone and their browsers and came up with nothing. So I think you're right. It's somebody from maybe the bench told one of their spots.
We don't know. We don't know. I mean, I'll tell you what. Let's just pin it on.
Yeah, that's safe. That's safe.
Yeah. Well, we want to get to one other legal matter. Alec Baldwin, charged with involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico. And I got to say, I'm not a practicing attorney or anything, but I got a law degree. It's not something I'm proud of, but I did get one. And just sort of a read of the standard of evidence to make out an involuntary manslaughter charge in New Mexico, and the facts as we understand them they've been reported. I don't see how you charge Alec Baldwin.
Well, Baldwin, if you recall, shortly after he killed Helena Hutchins, he did an interview with George Papadopoulos. Is that the guy's name?
Stephanopoulos. No, George Papadopoulos.
Stephanopoulos,
that was Alex Karras on Webster. Yeah, right. That was Alex Karras.
It all runs together in my aged brain. Okay.
Yeah. Alex Karras was more entertaining.
Yeah, right. Better athlete too.
Yeah.
He did an interview on ABC News where he justified in his mind what had happened. And if you review that interview, and you'll be happy to know I have an article coming out sometime today in the American Spectator analyzing this, he basically confessed to all of the elements needed to prove that he is guilty of involuntary manslaughter. I mean, he said, I was handed a gun. I didn't check it to see if it was loaded because that's somebody else's job, and that's a non-delegable obligation under New Mexico law. But he said he didn't check to see if the gun was loaded, and indeed he pointed it at Helena Hutchins, and he pulled the hammer back. The one thing he did not admit in that interview was that he pulled the trigger. But we know that he pulled the trigger because the FBI lab, if that counts for anything anymore, the FBI lab tested the gun and determined that there is no way this thing was going to fire unless you pulled the trigger. So if I'm the prosecutor in that case, I'm going to play his confession to ABC News and then just throw in the FBI report. You've got everything you need right there to establish that this guy is guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Well, so the lying about pulling the trigger, I get that, but I still don't think that establishes reckless conduct. It's not when you say it's a non-delegable responsibility to check the gun. That's a little. This is a unique case because you have an actor on set with a professional weapons expert who's been hired, and his responsibility is to make sure the weapons are safe and are used safely. And he wasn't just handed a gun. He was handed a gun and told, and this is not in dispute, it would appear, that the gun was cold, right, meaning the gun is not loaded. And then he said he took some stage direction from the cinematographer, the assistant director, or both of them, and then the gun went off. So he may have been pointed in, and then he pulled the trigger, clearly based on the evidence. But that the expert whose responsibility it is on set in the context of play acting, and he's still responsible legally to then check it and make sure that
he is. As a matter of fact, there is case law in New Mexico directly on this point. It doesn't involve an actor on a set, but it involves a case where an individual pointed a gun at someone else, and the gun went off, and he said, "Look, I didn't know the gun was loaded. I didn't know that somebody else had loaded the gun." And the New Mexico Supreme Court said, "Makes no difference."
Yeah, but that's not exactly that's not exactly on point. I don't think that's exactly on point, because so I didn't know it. Different than I was told by the weapons expert on site that we hired, because I'm not one, that this is a cold gun. That's not quite.
Yeah, and that was the justification he used in that interview, and I'm sure that will be his defense if this thing goes to trial.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well,
I still don't see how that gets him off the hook. Look, this thing, he could have prevented this if he had just used taken a minimal effort to determine for himself whether or not the gun was loaded, and if he had done that alone. And I think it's a non-delegable obligation under New Mexico law. If he had just done that, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
but he didn't do it, and he proceeded to intentionally point the gun at her and pull the trigger. I think they've got a very strong case, which is not to say that a jury is necessarily going to convict, because if I learned anything over 50 years of trying cases, you never know what a jury is going to do. But I think they've got a very strong case under the law out there.
Okay.
but
Mexico.
real quick, don't you think the bigger question though is how did the live round make it onto the set?
Well, they're saying that they're charging someone else, the armorer, this 24-year-old armorer, who was responsible for the safe maintenance of the weapons and ammunition on that set. And they're saying that she's responsible for having live rounds mixed in with the dummy rounds, and therefore she's being charged as well.
Right.
But that fact doesn't get Baldwin off the hook. And as a matter of fact,
although
George Clooney,
go ahead.
If you look at the ABC interview, they spliced in footage from George Clooney, who he said, "Look, in every set I've ever been on, the actor personally checks the weapon or has someone check the weapon in his presence and in the presence of the person that it's going to be pointed at, so that everybody knows what the situation is and is satisfied." Baldwin claimed, in his experience on the set, the armorer never lets you check the weapon yourself, but he then conceded that the armorer was not on the set at the time that he pointed the gun. He was handed the gun by the assistant director, Dave Halls, who said, "Cold gun." He then proceeds to point the gun and shoot the cinematographer.
I suppose
So,
industry standards may have some relevance here too. Could be introduced as evidence. This is how Alec Baldwin
Yeah.
has previously handled guns on sets, or this is what the Hollywood standard is. This is how these professionals work with actors. That'll all be interesting. But something else though too that I think undermines the
Yeah.
case here, which is okay. So if he's responsible for the involuntary killing of Helena Hutchins, then why isn't he also being charged for wounding the assistant director who got hit with the same bullet in the shoulder?
he may be charged, and I don't know. All of the coverage that I read, all the documents I've been able to get a hold of in this short period of time, only discuss the involuntary manslaughter.
But if he was not charged with shooting Souza, the guy who got shoulder injury, took the bullet that went through
Right.
Helena Hutchins, then wouldn't that undermine? How do you square that?
Well, to be consistent, I'm sure you could face some kind of charge. If they don't charge him, you could always say that was just prosecutorial discretion, but it remains to be seen whether or not there will be charges in that regard.
Yeah. All right. He is George Parry. He is a former federal and state prosecutor, as you heard, 50 years of trying cases. He is also a contributor to the American Spectator, and he writes at knowledgeisgood.net. George Parry, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Okay, glad to be with you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
This is Carol Platt-Liebau for townhall.com. So now we're learning what the left means by equity. 7 high schools in Fairfax County,